My son told me he wasn't expecting me for Christmas, so I canceled the mortgage payment I'd been covering for. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Marla, and I never thought I'd see the day when my own son would shut me out of his life. For years, it was just the two of us, me and Dylan. I worked double shifts as a nurse, packed his lunches, and did my best to make every holiday feel special. Even when money was tight, I made sure he never went without. When Dylan married Sierra, I was happy for him. She was pretty, polite, and seemed to love him. But over time, she changed the way he looked at me. It started small. Fewer phone calls, fewer visits, excuses about being too busy. I told myself it was normal. People grow up, start families, drift a little. This Christmas, I wanted to see them in their new home. I'd been helping Dylan with his mortgage for over a year, making payments he couldn't quite afford yet. He didn't ask, I offered. I told myself I was just helping him start strong, the same way any mother would. One evening, I called to ask what time I should come over for Christmas dinner. I could already imagine the smell of cinnamon rolls in the oven, the laughter, the tree glowing in their living room. But when Dylan answered, his voice sounded flat. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Hey, sweetheart," I replied, smiling even though he couldn't see it. "Just wanted to check what time you want me to come by on Christmas." There was a pause. A long one. Then he cleared his throat. We weren't really expecting you this year, Mom. Sierra wants to keep it small. Just her parents and, a few close friends." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. The words didn't fit in my head. Not expecting me? I'd paid part of the down payment for that house. My money kept the lights on. I'd been the one who taught him how to wrap gifts, how to make cocoa without burning the milk. But I swallowed it all and said softly, "Of course, honey. I understand. You too deserve your quiet Christmas." He sounded relieved, which stung more than anything. "Thanks, Mom. We'll see you soon, okay?" After the call ended, I sat in silence. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the kitchen clock. I stared at the Christmas cards lined up on the counter, every one of them from people who had families to go home to. Later that night, I opened my laptop and looked at my bank account. Line after line of payments, Dylan's mortgage, staring back at me. Every month, without fail, I had paid it. I thought of all those hours I spent on my feet, all those nights I came home too tired to eat, just so my son could have the kind of life I never did. And now he wasn't expecting me for Christmas. I closed the laptop, sat back, and let the quiet fill the room. My chest hurt, but somewhere deep inside, something colder started to grow, a quiet resolve I couldn't yet name. Marla still heard Dylan's voice in her head, that careful tone he used whenever Sierra was nearby. It hadn't always been that way. When Dylan first brought Sierra home, Marla remembered thinking how bright and kind the young woman seemed. She'd worn a yellow dress and brought a pie from a bakery that smelled like sunshine. Sierra had called her Mrs. Grant then, not Marla. It was sweet, respectful, or maybe just polite. The change didn't happen all at once. It crept in slowly, the way dust settles until you can't remember when the table stopped shining. The first time Marla noticed it was at Sunday dinner. She had cooked Dylan's favorite roast, the one she made every year for his birthday. Sierra barely touched it. Instead, she smiled that small, careful smile and said, "We don't really eat much red meat anymore. It's not great for the heart." After that, dinners became fewer. Dylan always had an excuse. Sierra had a yoga class, Sierra's parents were visiting, Sierra wasn't feeling well. Marla told herself it was fine. Young people had busy lives, but the quiet around her house grew thicker every week. When she did see them, Sierra made her feel like an old photograph that didn't quite fit the frame. The younger woman would compliment the house in that distant way people do when they don't mean it. "It's so cozy," she'd say, glancing around the small living room as if the walls were closing in. Marla tried to bridge the gap. She'd bring over homemade cookies, offer to help decorate their place, even brought Dylan an old quilt she'd stitched when he was a boy. Sierra accepted everything with a smile that never reached her eyes. Later, Marla found the quilt folded in a closet, tags still on the box she'd used. She noticed other small things, too. When she spoke, Sierra would correct her pronunciation of certain words, like pecan or coupon. Dylan started doing it too, joking that she talked like an old movie. Marla laughed along, but the sting stayed. Birthdays began to slip by unnoticed. First hers, then Dylan's. The one year she forgot to send a gift, Sierra called to remind her how much Dylan appreciated thoughtful gestures. It wasn't said cruelly, it was worse. It was said sweetly, like a teacher correcting a child. One afternoon, Marla overheard something that settled deep in her bones. She'd arrived early to drop off a casserole and heard Sierra say through the cracked door, "She means well, but it's embarrassing sometimes." Dylan didn't argue. He only sighed and said, "I know." Marla walked back to her car without ringing the bell. On the drive home, She kept thinking about that word, embarrassing. She'd cleaned hospital floors to keep food on the table, bought Dylan's first car, stayed up nights studying so she could earn more to give him better. And now, she was something to hide. That night, she looked around her small kitchen, the one she'd built with steady hands and endless love. The paint was chipped, the cabinets squeaked, the air smelled faintly of lavender detergent. It was simple, yes, but it was hers. For the first time, Marla began to see the truth she had been avoiding. Dylan wasn't just distant. He was ashamed, not of what she'd done, but of who she was. Marla could still remember the day Dylan called, voice tight with excitement. He and Sierra had found the perfect house, a small white place with a porch swing and a big oak tree out front. "It's everything we wanted, Mom," he'd said, the words spilling out of him. She had smiled through the phone, imagining him happy, settled, secure, everything she had worked for. But there was a hesitation in his tone when he mentioned the loan. The bank had denied them for the full amount. Sierra's credit wasn't strong, and Dylan's job was still new. "They said we need a co-signer," he'd muttered, embarrassed. "Just to get approved." Marla hadn't even thought twice. She remembered sitting at her kitchen table, papers spread out, signing her name in careful loops beside his. "Don't worry," she had said. "It's just to get you started." Her heart swelled with pride, thinking how far they'd come. What she didn't tell him was that she had drained most of her savings to cover the first few payments. When he promised to take over soon, she believed him. Every mother wants to believe her child keeps his word. Months passed. Then a year. Dylan never mentioned the mortgage again. Marla noticed he avoided the subject whenever she brought it up, steering the talk to safer ground. Sierra's new job, a weekend trip, some recipe he thought she'd like. At first, she assumed he was just busy. But after a while, busy started to sound a lot like forgetting. Each month, Marla logged in and sent the payment quietly. No reminders, no complaints. It became part of her routine, a silent act of love. Sometimes she'd check the balance after work, just to be sure it went through. 18 months of transfers, each one a small piece of her security chipped away. Late one evening, she sat at her desk, the glow of the laptop lighting her tired face. The banking screen showed a long list of transactions, the same amount over and over, stretching down the page. She scrolled slowly, her chest tightening. The numbers looked cold and mechanical, but behind each one she saw something human. An overtime shift, a skipped dinner, a bill delayed so Dylan wouldn't have to worry. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling, and tried to remember when it had stopped being help and started being habit. Maybe it was when Sierra began calling the house theirs, never mentioning who had made it possible. Maybe it was when Dylan stopped saying thank you. Or maybe it was when Marla realized that love, when given too freely, starts to look invisible. The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting for her next move. Her hand hovered over the mouse, and for a moment she imagined simply closing the account, ending it right there. But she couldn't, not yet. Not until she understood how something meant to protect her son had turned into the chain that kept her bound. 18 months. 18 silent payments. Each one felt heavier now, like proof of a promise that had never been kept. Snow drifted past the window in slow, quiet swirls, soft enough to blur the streetlights outside. Marla stood in her kitchen, hands deep in the same old casserole dish she used every Christmas. The recipe wasn't fancy, noodles, chicken, a touch of pepper, but it had been her husband's favorite. She could almost hear his laugh echoing from the hallway, that deep, easy sound that used to fill their home. Now, only the hum of the oven kept her company. She set the table anyway, one plate, one fork, one glass. Old habits die hard. The smell of baked cheese filled the air, warm and heavy, but she didn't feel hungry. She poured herself a small glass of wine and sat by the window, watching her neighborhood come alive. Across the street, the Coles were stringing last-minute lights, their grandkids tumbling through the snow in bright coats. 2 houses down, the Petersons carried trays of cookies to their car, laughing as they brushed snow off the windshield. Everywhere she looked, there was movement, people going somewhere people expected. Marla wasn't expected anywhere. The clock ticked past 7. She thought about calling Dylan, just to say Merry Christmas, but stopped herself. The memory of his last words still stung. "We weren't expecting you this year, Mom." The quiet inside the house pressed against her chest like a weight. She took a sip of wine, the warmth spreading slow and bitter. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the glass down. The casserole sat untouched. Somewhere deep in her chest, a hollow ache began to grow. Not loud, not sharp, just steady, like a song playing on repeat. Around 9, she grabbed her coat and keys. She told herself she only needed some air, a drive to clear her mind. The streets shimmered with frost, tire tracks carving thin lines through the snow. Christmas lights blinked from every porch, red, gold, green, like tiny beating hearts. Her car turned down the familiar street almost on its own. Dylan's house sat at the corner, warm light spilling through the front windows. She parked a little distance away, engine off, breath fogging the glass. For a moment, she just watched. Inside, laughter bounced from wall to wall. She could see Sierra moving gracefully between guests, a hostess in her element. There were gifts piled under the tree, candles flickering on the mantel. Then Dylan stepped into view, smiling as he handed out presents. His shirt was neatly pressed, his face glowing with that same look he used to give her when he opened his gifts as a child. Marla's chest tightened. There was no trace of her anywhere in that room. No photo, no ornament, nothing she recognized. It was as if she'd been erased from that part of his life. She stayed for a few minutes, long enough to see Sierra's parents raise a toast, long enough to watch her son laugh. Not with her, but without her. Then she turned the key, and the car started with a low groan. As she drove away, the snow thickened, covering the road behind her tracks. The lights in Dylan's house grew smaller in her rearview mirror until they disappeared completely. The night swallowed the sound of the tires, leaving only the quiet hum of the heater and the steady ache of a mother who no longer had a place to go. The drive home felt endless. The sky hung low, heavy with clouds, and the wipers brushed at the windshield with a slow, tired rhythm. The wine sheet had earlier left her warm but hollow, her thoughts dull around the edges. The streets were empty except for the flicker of colored lights that lined fences and porches. Marla's hands stayed steady on the wheel, though she couldn't feel them much. When she finally pulled into her driveway, the porch light flicked on automatically, shining over the faded welcome. The house looked smaller than usual, quieter somehow. She sat in the car for a long moment before turning off the engine. The ticking of the cooling motor filled the silence, faint and lonely. Inside, the air was cool and still. The casserole dish from earlier sat on the counter, untouched. The faint smell of baked cheese and thyme hung in the room, sharp and stale. She slipped off her coat, draping it over a chair, then reached for the small lamp on the side table. Its soft light spread through the living room, touching the framed photos along the shelf. Dylan as a boy holding his first bike, his missing tooth smile, her late husband's steady arm around them both. Her gaze lingered on one photo in particular. Tom standing beside her at their old home, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. His eyes had always been calm, sure, even when life wasn't. She could almost hear him again, the words he'd told her years ago when Dylan had broken her trust for the first time. Don't let anyone use your love against you, March. She moved to the desk where she kept her bills and papers. The mortgage file sat near the edge, worn from being opened too many times. She placed her palm on it for a moment, breathing deeply, then sat down. The chair creaked beneath her. Her laptop blinked to life. She typed in her password, her fingers steady despite the tremor in her chest. The bank's logo appeared, cold and blue. She opened the payment portal, and the numbers lined up neatly in front of her. Every dollar she'd sent, every month she'd kept him safe from falling behind. She scrolled down slowly, her eyes following the pattern. Each transaction felt like a small confession, a reminder of how far she had gone to protect him. 18 months of love disguised as obligation. She hadn't realized how much she'd given until she saw it all at once, neatly documented, impersonal. Her mouse hovered over the settings icon. A small line of text read recurring payments, active. She clicked it. The screen asked, "Are you sure you want to cancel?" For a moment, she just stared at the question. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. Then she clicked yes. The page refreshed. The words changed. No active payments scheduled. Marla leaned back, letting out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her eyes closed, and the quiet filled the room. Somewhere outside, a wind chime tinkled faintly. She looked toward the window. Snow still falling, soft and steady, covering everything in sight. She whispered, almost without thinking, "Merry Christmas, Dylan." Her voice was calm, almost gentle, carrying neither anger nor regret. She closed the laptop, turned off the lamp, and stood in the stillness of her small, aging house. The only thing left that was truly hers. 3 weeks passed before the phone rang. Marla was folding laundry, the quiet hum of the dryer the only sound in the house. When she saw Dylan's name flash across the screen, she hesitated. For a moment, she considered letting it ring. Then she sighed and answered. "Hey, Mom," he said, voice tight. No warmth, no greeting, just a strain that made her shoulders tense. "Hello, Dylan," she replied evenly, setting down a towel. There was a pause, and she could hear faint sounds in the background, voices, the clatter of something dropped, Sierra's sharp tone cutting through. Then Dylan spoke again, quicker this time. "Listen, did you mess with the mortgage payment or something? They're saying it didn't go through this month." Marla sat down at the edge of the couch. "No mistake," she said softly. "What do you mean, no mistake?" His voice rose a notch. "Mom, the payment didn't clear. The bank called me. They said it's overdue." She could hear Sierra in the background now, her words muffled but tense. "Ask her if she stopped it. Ask her why." Marla's hand rested on her knee, steady. "I thought you weren't expecting me this year," she said. So I figured you wouldn't expect my payments either. For a second, everything went silent. Even the sound of his breathing stopped. Then came a sharp exhale, part disbelief, part anger. Mom, are you serious right now? You can't do that. Do you have any idea what this does to my credit? To my mortgage? Marla's eyes drifted toward the window. The snow outside had started melting into patches of dull gray. I'm sure you'll manage, she said, her tone even. Manage? His laugh was bitter, strained. This isn't a joke. We have responsibilities, we have plans. In the background, Sierra's voice rose again. Tell her she needs to fix it now. We can't afford a late mark. Dylan's tone hardened. You have to send the payment. I'll pay you back later, but you can't just leave us hanging like this. Marla closed her eyes, listening to his words carefully. They sounded rehearsed, not born of worry, but of entitlement. The same tone he'd used when he was young and wanted something without earning it. You're old enough to pay your own bills, she said quietly. There was another pause, longer this time. She could almost picture his expression, jaw tight, disbelief turning to fury. So that's it, he said finally. You're just done helping? After everything you promised? She felt something shift inside her. Not cruel, not cold, just final. I never promised forever, Dylan. Sierra's voice came through faintly, full of scorn. Unbelievable. After all we've done for her. Marla let out a slow breath. I hope you both have a good evening, she said, then gently pressed end call. The silence that followed was clean and absolute. She sat for a while, listening to the faint ticking of the clock. Outside, the sky had turned a muted silver, and the air felt lighter somehow, as if, in that small act of refusal, she had finally taken back something that had been hers all along. The knock came hard and fast, rattling the glass in the front door. Marla looked up from her chair, the book in her lap half closed. She already knew who it was. The sharp rhythm, the impatience behind it, no neighbor knocked like that. She rose slowly, smoothing her sweater, and opened the door. Sierra stood on the porch, hair pulled tight, cheeks flushed from the cold. Her coat hung open, snow still clinging to the sleeves. We need to talk, Sierra snapped, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Marla motioned toward the living room. Go ahead. Sierra didn't sit. She stood in the center of the room, hands moving restlessly. You've put us in a terrible situation. The bank sent another notice. Do you even realize what happens if we fall behind again? Marla settled back into her recliner, folding her hands over the armrest. Her voice stayed calm. You might want to close the door before all the heat escapes. Sierra slammed it shut, then turned, her anger bubbling. This isn't funny. We could lose everything because you decided to stop paying. You can't just walk away like that. Marla studied her carefully. The young woman's voice trembled, not from fear but from outrage. You seem to be managing everything else just fine, Marla said. I assumed this would be no different. That house was supposed to be a fresh start for us. Sierra's eyes flashed. You helped us get it, and now you're ruining it. Dylan's been a wreck trying to fix your mistake. Marla tilted her head slightly. A mistake implies it wasn't a choice. For a moment, Sierra looked uncertain, then her anger returned. If we lose the house, it'll be on you. Do you understand that? All the money we've put in, all the time gone. Marla's tone didn't waver. Then maybe, she said, you should have treated the woman who bought it for you with a little more respect. The words landed heavy between them. Sierra blinked, her mouth parting as if she hadn't expected the quiet firmness behind them. The wind outside rattled the window pane, filling the space where no one spoke. Sierra's voice softened, almost pleading now. You can't do this to us. Marla looked toward the mantel, where a small clock ticked steadily. I already did, she said. Sierra's breath hitched. You'd really let us lose everything? Marla's gaze met hers, calm and unshaken. I'm not letting you lose anything. I'm just giving you what you said you wanted. Independence. For the first time, Sierra seemed unsure of what to say. Her shoulders sagged, and the fire drained from her eyes. She turned toward the door, muttering something under her breath that Marla couldn't catch. The door opened with a rush of cold air, then slammed shut again. The house fell silent except for the faint hum of the furnace. Marla leaned back in her chair, letting her eyes rest on the quiet room. The tension that had lived in her chest for months began to loosen. No guilt, no ache, just stillness. She reached for her book again, her hands steady, the corners of her mouth lifting into the faintest smile. For the first time in years, peace felt like something she could keep. A gray morning settled over the town when the trouble finally caught up with Dylan. He was still in bed when Sierra burst into the room, waving a letter. They sent another notice, she said, her voice tight. It says the loan's been flagged for review. They're threatening late fees and credit penalties. Dylan rubbed his eyes, taking the envelope from her. The paper crackled as he read, the words blurring together in his tired mind. It wasn't just a warning this time, it was a demand. The amount due was higher than he expected, stacked with fines. He threw the letter onto the nightstand. It's not that serious. We'll handle it. Sierra folded her arms. With what money, Dylan? My parents already said they can't cover another payment for us. Her voice cracked slightly. They think we need to grow up and take responsibility. Their words, not mine. He didn't respond. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint hiss of the heater. When he finally spoke, his tone was sharp. I told you I'd take care of it. Stop acting like this is my fault. Sierra stared at him. Who else's fault could it be? You told me your mother would help until we got steady. Dylan turned away, jaw tight. She changed her mind. Her laugh came out bitter. No, she stopped being your safety net. There's a difference. She grabbed her coat from the chair. I'm not staying here waiting for the house to disappear. Figure it out. When the door slammed, Dylan was left alone with the echo. He sank onto the bed, the letter staring back at him from the table. He hated the feeling in his chest, not fear, but something close to shame. Still, pride kept his hands from dialing his mother's number. Across town, Marla sat at a cafe with her sister, Ellen. The windows fogged from the steam of fresh coffee, and the smell of baked bread hung in the air. Marla stirred her cup slowly, her eyes soft but thoughtful. Ellen leaned in. So, have you heard from him? Marla shook her head. Not since the last call. Good, Ellen said, breaking a piece off her muffin. He's learning what happens when you treat people like backup plans. Marla smiled faintly. He always was stubborn. Runs in the family, Ellen teased, nudging her. Then, more gently, you did what you had to do. Sometimes letting them fall is the only way they learn. Marla looked out the window. The snow had melted into slush along the curbs. A young couple hurried past, laughing, arms wrapped around each other. She took a slow sip of coffee, the warmth spreading through her chest. That night, she slept without dreams for the first time in years. No lists running through her head, no worry about due dates or bank alerts. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't ache. When morning came, she woke to soft light spilling across the floor and realized how different peace felt when it wasn't borrowed or conditional. Somewhere, she imagined Dylan pacing his living room, letters piling on the counter, anger growing where gratitude should have been. But for once, she didn't carry the weight of it. She'd finally put it down. Marla was trimming the dead leaves from her potted fern when she heard the soft knock at the door. It wasn't hurried like Sierra's had been. This one carried hesitation, a rhythm of guilt wrapped in politeness. She wiped her hands on a towel and opened it. Dylan stood there, bundled in a jacket that looked a size too big, eyes tired, hair slightly unkempt. He forced a small smile. Hey, Mom. Marla stepped aside. Come in, Dylan. He entered slowly, glancing around the living room like it was unfamiliar. His gaze landed on the recliner, then the pictures on the wall, the small details of a place he used to call home. Looks the same, he muttered. It usually does, she said, taking her seat. He remained standing, rubbing his hands together. Listen, I know things got rough. I probably said some things I shouldn't have. Sierra's been stressed, and I've been under pressure with work. You know how it is. Marla nodded, offering nothing. The silence stretched until he filled it again. I shouldn't have talked to you like that, he continued. You were just trying to help. And well, I appreciate everything you've done. Really. His words were smooth, almost practiced. He didn't meet her eyes when he said them. She studied him quietly. Is that what you came to tell me? He shifted, avoiding her gaze. Partly. The truth is, we're a little behind right now, just until things level out. I was wondering if maybe you could help with a couple payments again, just to get us back on track. Marla's fingers tightened slightly on the armrest. I see. He spoke faster, sensing the pause. It wouldn't be for long this time. I'd make sure you got reimbursed. Sierra's hours got cut at the clinic, and well, it's just temporary. You know I'd do the same for you. Marla looked at him, really looked at him. The boy she had carried through sickness, the young man she had lifted through hardship, now standing in front of her asking not out of humility, but convenience. She drew in a quiet breath. Dylan, you taught me something this Christmas. He blinked, uncertain. What's that? That love, she said softly, shouldn't cost monthly installments. For the first time, his face showed something real. Not anger, not charm, just confusion that gave way to discomfort. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Mom, I didn't mean. Marla raised a hand gently. I know what you meant. Her tone wasn't cruel, just final. And I think you've already said enough. The clock on the mantel ticked softly behind them. He looked around once more, eyes darting over the walls as if searching for a version of her that might still say yes. Finding none, he gave a short nod and turned toward the door. He didn't say goodbye. When the latch clicked shut, Marla exhaled slowly. The house felt still again, but not empty. The quiet that followed wasn't lonely this time. It was steady earned. She reached for her fern, trimmed another leaf, and let the small sound of snipping mark the end of a long, unbalanced chapter. A year slid by quietly, the seasons turning without ceremony. When December came again, the air carried that same crisp chill, but the heaviness that once filled Marla's home had lifted. The walls seemed brighter, though she hadn't repainted them. The silence was softer now, no longer the kind that pressed on her chest. On Christmas morning, she woke to the sound of her sister Ellen humming in the kitchen. The smell of cinnamon and coffee drifted down the hallway. Marla pulled on her robe and followed it, smiling at the sight of Ellen flipping pancakes, her hair tied up messily. "Merry Christmas," Ellen said, sliding a plate across the counter. "You get the first batch. Perks of hosting." Marla laughed, sitting down. "I think you've been doing most of the work." Ellen poured her a mug of coffee. "You've done plenty. You're here, aren't you? That's what matters." By noon, the house was full of gentle noise. Tom's old friends arrived with casseroles and bottles of wine, shaking snow from their coats. The neighbors brought cookies and stories about their grandkids. Laughter filled the living room, mixing with the sound of a record spinning softly in the background. It had been years since Marla had heard her home sound like that. Someone asked about Dylan, a well-meaning question tossed into the warmth. Marla smiled politely and said, "He's busy these days." It was enough. The conversation moved on, and no one noticed the brief shadow in her eye. Later, when the plates were cleared and the music had faded, Marla slipped outside with her coat and a thermos of cocoa. The night was calm, the sky dusted with stars. Across the neighborhood, windows glowed gold behind frosted glass. Somewhere, carolers sang faintly off-key, their voices carried by the cold. She walked toward the small park down the street, where a group from the foster home was holding their annual Christmas gathering. It had been her idea, to use the money she once spent on Dylan's mortgage to buy gifts for the children. Simple things: scarves, books, board games, warm socks. Nothing extravagant, but everything given with care. When she arrived, the children were tearing into wrapping paper, laughter bubbling into the air. One little boy ran up to her, holding a toy truck. "Did you bring this?" he asked, eyes wide. She knelt beside him. "Santa might have had some help this year," she said with a smile. He grinned and dashed off, his boots kicking up snow. Ellen joined her a few minutes later, handing her a cup of cocoa. "You did good, March." Marla nodded, her gaze fixed on the children's laughter. "Feels different this year," she murmured. "Better different?" Ellen asked. "Peaceful," Marla said simply. They stood there in the cold, the park lights glowing faintly against the falling snow. The sound of joy filled the air, and for the first time in a long while, it didn't hurt to listen. Marla took a slow sip of cocoa, the sweetness warming her chest. "I may have lost a son," she said softly, almost to herself, "but I found my peace." The snow fell a little harder then, covering footprints and rooftops alike. Somewhere nearby, a child's laughter echoed through the night, light and free, the kind of sound that didn't ask for anything in return. "Do you think I did the right thing by walking away, or should I have given my son and Sierra another chance?" Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned.